It is not agreed upon as far as its meaning by Christians over the centuries. In fact, some denominations, because it is so bewildering and so confusing, they delete this altogether. In fact, in the United Methodist Church, their official position on this is that they delete this part from the Apostles' Creed. Now, there might be individual congregations that use it, but their official position is they delete this from the Apostles' Creed and send it into hell. This actually appeared in the creed later on. It was not part of the original creed. In fact, it was added in 359 AD, long after the Apostles' Creed had been used for many years in the early church. It was a council, the Synod of Sirmium, which added this article to the creed in 359 AD. What does it mean? What does it mean? Well, basically, when the authors of the Apostles' Creed added this to the creed, they were simply trying to say that Jesus Christ died. Jonathan was right when he told the children that. They were simply trying to say that Jesus Christ died. Crucified, dead, and buried, and descended into hell. There was a belief in that day that everyone who died went to a place called Sheol. That was the Old Testament word that was used, Sheol. And Sheol is sometimes translated hell. It was not a place of punishment. It was not a place of reward. It was a place where people in the Old Testament believed that everybody went when they died. Sheol, translated hell. And so that word in the creed simply refers to the fact that when Jesus died, he went to the place where they believed everybody went when they died. This place called Sheol, S-H-E-O-L, meaning which they called hell, but not a place of punishment. So what they were trying to say again was that Jesus Christ died a real death. That's all they were saying when they put this in the creed. There were people in that day, in the early church, there were heresies that sprang up, and they tried to deny the death of Jesus. They said Jesus could not have died. He was God. Well, the framers of the creed said it was important to affirm the fact that he actually was dead. His heart quit beating, his brain waves were not functioning, his lips were lifeless, his hands did not move. He was dead in the tomb. So that's all they were saying. But theologians in the early church began to see another dimension in this particular phrase. They started pondering it and reflecting upon it, and so the belief arose that Jesus descended into hell for a purpose. And they said, these theologians said, in the early church, some of them, that when Jesus died, between Good Friday and Easter, during that period of time, his body was still in the grave. Yes, he was still dead, but his spirit went and preached the gospel to people who had died in the Old Testament who had not had a chance to hear the gospel. And so the belief arose that Jesus went on a preaching mission. He went on a preaching mission. His spirit did, not his body. His body was still in the tomb, but his spirit went to preach to people who hadn't heard the gospel. And he did that between Good Friday and Easter morning. And so that is the belief which arose in the early church among some of the theologians, that this is what happened when Jesus was in the tomb. He started preaching to folks in this place called Sheol, or hell. And they found a verse in the Bible which kind of hints at that possibility. And the verse is 1 Peter 3, we just read, where it says, Jesus was put to death in the flesh, but he was raised to life in the spirit, in which also he went and preached to the spirits who are in prison, the spirits who were once upon a time disobedient, the times when the patience of God waited in the days of Noah, while the ark was being built. And so, in the early church, they took those words to mean, at least some of them did, that Jesus went and preached. They took that little verse from Peter and they built their idea upon the fact that Jesus, between Good Friday and Easter, went on a preaching mission to those who hadn't heard the gospel. Now this is still a possible interpretation of that part of the Apostles' indicates a possibility. In fact, William Barclay, a very respected biblical scholar from Scotland, whose commentaries are used by many pastors, William Barclay says this is what Jesus was doing between Good Friday and Easter. He was preaching. His Spirit was out preaching to those folks who hadn't heard the gospel. As far as my own interpretation of this, he sent them into hell, I like what John Calvin said. John Calvin was the founder of the Presbyterian Church, and John Calvin wanted this phrase, he descended to hell, retained. He didn't want to delete it. He wanted to include it and keep it in the creed. And what he said was that this phrase, he descended into hell, refers to what happened to Jesus while he was on the cross. When Jesus was on the cross, he descended into a kind of hell because of all of the punishment that he was receiving at that point. In fact, Calvin said this, descent into hell is an expression of the spiritual torment that Christ underwent for us. Surely no more terrible abyss can be conceived than to feel yourself forsaken by God. And when you call upon him, to not be heard. It is as if God himself had plotted your ruin. We see that Christ was so cast down as to be compelled to cry out in deep anguish, my God, why have you forsaken me? His words were clearly drawn forth from the anguish deep within his heart. And so Calvin said, he descended into hell. That refers not to what happened to Christ between Good Friday and Easter. That refers to what happened to Christ while he was on the cross.